expecting Stepan Bartulica from ACR party. He's on his way. We will start the conversation because it's a really busy day today in Econ Committee in the European Parliament. They have votes later today, and I'm very, very happy and honored to have here two fantastic voices of the European Parliament's policy in digital finance. Nikos Papandreou for the Social Democratic Party, Ondrej Kovarik, who until recently was a member of the European Parliament, and he worked on every regulation you can imagine in the sphere of digital finance. So I would like to start a very important question, I think. I want you to introduce your work in the European Parliament very briefly and tell me where we are standing right now when it comes to payments in Europe, when it comes to the digital finance in Europe or financial policy in Europe, and if we are competitive, where we are standing right now. I would like to start with you, Nikos.
Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. Concentrating with the new group of people. This morning we had a discussion on digital assets in the Parliament in the Econ Committee. So it covered quite a bit of, it was both private sector and RSB. So we had public and private sector. And actually it's something where we learned that actually we're going quite fast in terms of between United States, I think is the comparison in Europe, with the stable coins being produced now, euro-denominated stable coins. So that's moving faster than I expected. I think it's such a new world that it's very hard to put it all together into one easy vision. And my way of looking at it, maybe someone has already said that this morning, is what will this world look like in 10 years in the best possible version? I always like for mathematics, which we've done, is the 0, 1 are the easy solutions. So the 1 is when everything has worked fine, and the 0 is a massive breakdown. So destabilized financial system. So coming from S&D, we're always a little bit worried, trying to find the problems that go wrong, and that might mean we overregulate. On the other hand, in a perfect world, this would be a place where the average citizen and the small deposit holder could have access to banking through tokenized deposits and through the speed of transactions, which needs actually a high level of financial literacy within the EU. And that's also something we've been discussing about. So I think the system that the people here probably are quite far ahead in terms of where the average citizen is today, in terms of what's going on here. So if you go to Greece and you talk about tokenized deposits, and even the digital euro, and I know my friend Bartulica, who won't be here, worries about the digital euro as a form of possible information following from the ECB. So we have lots of privacy issues. So I think today the landscape is changing a lot, and in my mind it's even hard to make the taxonomy of DLT, of stablecoins, of crypto assets. The digital euro actually shouldn't be discussed in the same file, the digital euro. That's basically central bank money in a digital form instead of cash. So it's not a competitor with stablecoin. It's a legal tender from the public sector, so it should not be in the same discussion. So I think the panorama is exciting for those who like technology, a little bit difficult for the citizen to know, and quite a big opportunity for companies entering the stablecoin world.
Ondrej?
First of all, good afternoon, everybody, and happy to join the panel. I think it really depends on what kind of finance we look into, right? I mean, there's a lot of very smart people also here in the room and at the summit. There's a lot of, I think, ideas, technology, innovation, but I think we should also be quite clear, right? I mean, let's say, if you look at the banks, the biggest banks are not in Europe in terms of the amount of capital. If you look at the capital markets, again, we're suffering, especially with the risk capital, with venture capital. I think in payment and settlements, I think we're quite well positioned globally. And we just had recently the update of payment services rules, which obviously on one hand creates a lot of headaches in terms of how the MiCA and payment services license organization will work together. But in general, I think it's a good direction of travel. We have rules like MiCA, but I think on stablecoins or tokenizations, we are just at this point, and just I'll be fully open, we're just desperately trying to grasp, what's happening across the globe. We may get to the race. We'll see the proposals for policy action quite, I think, tomorrow. But I think these are things that we are not well positioned, and we need to get actually more action to be more competitive. Mm-hmm. And saying that, and we can look at liquidity pools and all these things. Saying that still bearing in mind that the technology drive, the appetite, the technological savviness, and also I think not only on the business side but also on the consumer side is there. But we just need to be able to provide, let's say, solution that originates and grow in Europe, and not only be dependent on the solutions that come from the global competition. Global competition is hard, but we need to be able to face it, openly and with actually a good inputs also from our side. And I think we don't have it all the time as we speak.
So the first message is that overall, we are not necessarily in the best condition we could be, but we are doing quite well in the competition with other developed economies, and we are keeping the pace in this global competition that suddenly became also geopolitical. And I would like to go to trickle down a little bit and go to the field of payments and ask you, Nikos. You are the leading voice of digital finance in the Social Democratic Party, which in the past was a little bit concerned about these developments and these innovations. And you are also the shadow rapporteur of Digital Euro. I would like to ask you how you see in the big picture as an economist the efficiencies that tokenization of payments bring to the citizens, to the companies, and what do you think about the source of these efficiencies? Should be originated in a central bank solution or in a private solution?
I'll go to the second question first. I think these efficiencies will only basically come from the private sector, and that's probably where they should be. The central bank will be the monitor and the auditor and the supervisor for this, so that's the role. So the efficiencies are already coming from that sector. I think the worry is that the speed, and that's a typical, I guess, EU approach or any policy person, the speed of things is so fast, and the tendency for us, and you've been there too, is to try and predict all the problems and re-regulate them before they appear. So to sort of compare the two worlds, US and Europe, is the US lets it work anyway and then comes in and regulates, and the EU tries to regulate before the problem appears, hoping to predict all the risks. So that causes a problem. On the other hand, if you were going to talk to someone who wants to make a stable coin, you have lots of good propositions for him to do that in Europe. The returns might be less, but it's more secure. So in the end, if you've heard that thing called the Brussels effect, which you've talked about in the past, that the United States is the software and thought producer, China is the infrastructure producer, that's maybe old, and Brussels the regulator. So maybe Brussels will be the sort of stable oasis of stablecoin in this world of stablecoins, which we are sure is going to get out of hand at some point. I was just telling you about, this morning we talked about a company called Paxos that mistakenly issued 300 trillion stablecoins. And after 20 minutes had to take it off the table. Okay, so imagine if that had an impact on the real world, which it didn't because we're still at early stage. So I worry about those effects the same way. To go off a little bit, in the 1980s, I'm older, there was these movies about war games where we had the Soviet Union versus NATO. I guess we have that again somehow, where you had to automatize the nuclear weapon and have it automatic response. So if ICBM left from England, it had to automatically respond to the cruise or whatever the missiles were from Russia back then. So the automatic element of this, and given AI, which we haven't brought up at all, might cause huge instability. That is my worry. And also the debanking. There is a debanking when we have a stable coin. It takes the money out of the bank. How much can we take out? I mean, there is an asset there, okay, but how much and what will happen anyway? The bonds, the rates, the interest rates. The United States is actually funding its deficit from stablecoins. So from a federal government perspective, it's smart. And we can do that the same. Of course, we don't have a Eurobond. We don't have a Europe-wide bond that we can fund our deficit. Each country will do it on its own. So those are issues that, as an economist, I would be looking at, not so much as a stablecoin enthusiast, but how the whole thing will be regulated.
Thank you, Nico. I would like to ask you, Ondrej, moving from the payments. Oh, we have Mr. Bartulica with us. Welcome.
Sorry, I'm late.
We started the conversation by asking the gentlemen what is their vision about the digital finance and the payment system in Europe so far. And I was asking Nikos about his views about the payment system in Europe and how the tokenization of payments actually helps. And being shadow rapporteur of Digital Euro obviously creates concerns to people and hopes to people. Nikos is in the side of the hope. Do you have concerns? You can drink your water.
Okay. So again, apologies for being late, and thank you for the kind invitation. So on the digital euro, I remain a skeptic. That was my initial intuition. Why? Because I don't see the role of the ECB including devising payment schemes for consumers. I think it's uncharted territory that the regulatory body is now preparing a new payment option that will actually be competing with the existing payment schemes that are in place. And I think what I've heard from many stakeholders in the private sector, they're very concerned about this, that the ECB is overstepping its competence and is entering into this area. Having said that, I will remind everyone that the only example we have of a similar case, a digital currency being introduced like this, is in China. From what I know, it hasn't been particularly successful. And just judging from past experience, when public institutions or the government devise apps or a new service that they would like to provide for citizens on an everyday basis, it tends to be unpopular. It tends not to work well. It tends not to be user-friendly. And so I'm afraid that the ECB, in the end, will impose this digital euro on businesses. They have not responded to my questions on the real costs of this project. They range from anywhere between 3 and 15 billion euro, so they don't have a precise number for the cost, nor the businesses that this will affect, the number of businesses this will affect. So what could happen? We could have, in some form, a digital euro, which very few Europeans, in fact, will want to use. And so the question will be, who will be accountable? Madame Lagarde likely will no longer be in her position at the head of the ECB. So who will be accountable? Who will be held accountable? And as many times in the past, no one is the answer. No one will be held accountable. So I remain skeptical. I think that people today are generally very happy with the payment options they have at their disposal. I do not see any public pressure pushing for the ECB to act in this way. And so it's coming from the top down, politically speaking. And so for me, as a member of ECR but representing Croatian, I can say that my voters are either indifferent or very hostile to this idea. They don't have confidence that this is something that they need and that they don't trust, frankly, that their privacy will be protected, etc. So for many reasons. So I'm definitely, as you stated, on the concern side. I remain on the concern side. I think our rapporteur, Navarrete, has tried very hard to present a balanced report. In many ways I can sympathize. It's not an easy position to have, and we'll see what comes out of the negotiating process. But again, I think there's many reasons still to be very skeptical.
Thank you very much. And you see how political it had become. I think, Ondrej, in the conversations we had in MiCA and the DLT pilot regime, the concerns were a little bit more technical and much less political. So you had the experience of MiCA, the DLT pilot regime, the transfer of funds regulation. I would like to ask you how competitive Europe become because of this enabling regulatory framework, or you think that the regulation by itself is not enough in order to make competitive digital finance Europe? Would you change something compared to what you did 3-4 years ago?
I don't know if we have so much time for it, but no, I think in general, on your question, for instance, those pieces of legislation, I think, first of all, they bring some kind of fundamental clarity and stability to the environment. And I think this was also one of the advantages of MiCA and all the other rules that came in. And I think this is important. Obviously, the key is implementation, and this is what we were also discussing yesterday at the panel here. And I think the practice of implementation, enforcement, and application of the rules is actually that decides whether it's successful or not. We are currently in the stage where, you know, the CASPs are receiving their authorization and licenses. If this is done properly, quickly, if there are no other roadblocks, then we can say, okay, it makes sense. But if you ask me, and I've been consistent, for instance, when it comes to MiCA, what I didn't like about it, two main things. There is no proportionality when it comes to treatment of different CASPs. So in the end, we have the same amount of conditions, roughly. I know that there are some slight differences, but I would rather see this proportionality much more. CASPs that are global players acting, you know, in all jurisdictions with a lot of human and financial resources are basically on the same footing as, and I come from Czech Republic, you know, we even have companies where like two guys just started a business with, you know, opening a Bitcoin ATM. They are more or less the same CASP as the global company. And I think this is something where if we look at the possible review of MiCA, let's do this. Let's introduce clear proportionality. The second thing, and I think this is all over the place right now. I think the MiCA was just and is still too strict on the issuance of stablecoins. When it was adopted, I clearly stated, and I think it's publicly, you can publicly find it. I said, MiCA as it stands will basically provide no motivation for companies to issue euro-denominated stablecoins, or if they do, it will be done by banks. And this is exactly what's happening 4 years right after. And now we have to actually find out what do we do next. So I think we should also look at you know, at the complex of those rules, because MiCA is not isolated. A lot of companies need to deal with other regulatory burden. It's AML legislation, it's DORA, all the other stuff. So I think we should always look into these things as a sort of communicating vessels. But for instance, and like very last comments, on DLT pilot regime, I know that it's not working well. There's not that many, you know, licenses issued across Europe on these projects. But in principle, I really think that this is a legislative work or policy-making work that we should engage more in future. The pace of innovation in whatever digital technology and digital finance is, I think, a great example, is so fast that we are not able to cope with it in any case by introducing the real set of rules. But what we can do, we can actually open cooperative platform and environment, if we call it a pilot regime or sandbox or whatever. I mean, the idea is this principle, the cooperation between the private and public entities on introducing new products or launching new business models in the control area where we can actually sort of use the synergies of the cooperation. We need to do this more. And I think this would be sort of my invitation. Let's push for this kind of rule-making more than the regulatory work like we know it, for instance, from the banking regulation or the legacy, the financial services.
Ondrej, I want to stay on this topic. We are expecting tomorrow announcements to come from the European Commission about significant changes on some files, less significant or less bulky changes in other areas. Can you please navigate us around these announcements, and do you think that they improve the competence of the European Union or not?
Well, we need to see it. I mean, always the devil is in the detail, but and also it will be a Commission proposal. So it's just the beginning of the entire game, and then the member states. I think mainly the member states, but also colleagues in the European Parliament will enter into it. I think first of all, I mean, also for what we heard yesterday from Commissioner Albuquerque, this is definitely very good direction of travel. And I think this is also sort of an understanding by the Commission that they need to engage in this broader policy making. Mm-hmm. On one hand, I think how I read it, the Commission is actually trying to address the issue of digital assets and whatever class of assets we can talk, and basically align the existing legislation to the standards already set by MiCA. And as I said, MiCA is not isolated island, so you really need to make sure that everything altogether communicates, because I mean, in the European Parliament or in the Council, we are dealing with these files separately. So we have a negotiating team for MiCA, a negotiating team for AML, but on the compliance side, on the business side, you have to deal with them all, one at a time. And this is something that this is a perspective we didn't have enough, I think, on our mind when negotiating the initial proposals, and I really hope that this is something that the Commission will try to remedy by the proposal. And then obviously the overall openness of the legislation for further tokenization initiatives. Because, to be honest, when you look at the MiCA, and apart from these specific parts of asset reference tokens, and yes, there are asset reference tokens in MiCA, do you remember that? And the electronic money token, there's not much about tokenization in MiCA. So I think this is something we really need to step in. And to be honest, I think this is also under the pressure of what is happening in the US. It's good that we react. I hope the reaction will be as bold as the announcement by the Commission. And I really hope that whatever happens in the process, it will not weaken or undermine. It will not reintroduce some overall or overly prudential measures. And it will only sort of follow these, I would say, pro-innovation path that the Commission is sort of inviting us to take.
Thank you. Stepan, in my last week in the European Parliament, it happened to be in the United States, and I had some meetings with people in the Senate. And I used the line that Nikos Papandreou used earlier about America innovates, Europe regulates, and Asia copies and sometimes improves. And I said to them, it was still Biden administration, Trump was not in the radar yet. And I said, the transatlantic partnership is very harmed from the story of Trump, and we are moving to a new status where Europe innovates, Europe regulates, and he who doesn't copy entered to a blacklist. And I got their attention, because when you speak to Americans, you need to get their attention somehow. I would like to ask you how we make a competitive Europe in terms of its financial system, through more centralization or through more coordination in the periphery, allowing the member states innovate and then trickling down the innovation to the center. What is your political view on this?
So just a brief remark, Ondrej mentioned pressure coming from the US because all this new digital technology is moving very quickly. At a recent lunch with Christine Lagarde at the ECB headquarters in Frankfurt, we were discussing these issues, and I believe she mentioned the Genius Act at least 5 times during the lunch. And I think it was out of fear of the unknown, what this legislation will unleash in the future that it will arise out of this. And so if you're doing policy from a position of weakness or fear, it's not a good sign, and that's what I detected. When it comes to the United States, I think under Trump we see clearly this policy of abandoning the Green New Deal, as he says, the scam, and the course is deregulation and opening America up for business. Now, when we look at Europe, obviously we have a strategic interest in having, good trade relations. I know many people were not thrilled with this agreement between the EU and America on trade, but I think it, under the circumstances, is something we can live with. But what I hear from businesses is that the burden of complying with regulations in the EU is simply too much. So we have companies like Facebook, giant tech companies who have decided, instead of trying to comply with new regulations, they simply have, for the time being, banned advertising of political content on Meta platforms. So that's one solution. They will simply, they will endure the loss of that revenue, and for them it's a better choice than to comply with these new regulations. And that's the reality we live with. What does that mean then for a middle-sized business? If a tech giant is not willing to invest in the people and the energy it takes to comply. Not to mention the banking sector. So I think we all realize what the reality is of being a client at a bank. As a PEP client, I have to update my information every 6 months. It's harassment. It's harassment, and that's what we all live with. So, in my view, deregulation is not a dirty word. I know they prefer simplification in Brussels, but I will say deregulation is something badly needed. I think that we see many signs that the green deal is the cost is too high for the meager results we're getting. So there's many studies out showing that this simply is too costly for businesses. And in the end, we're in politics to serve the ordinary person, to allow people to live a prosperous life, not to force them to leave and go to the United States if you're an entrepreneur. So I think the European Union, in particular, the Commission, this mindset, frankly, has to change very quickly, very quickly. I come from Croatia. I tell people there, in the United States, it's a culture where it's easy to hire, easy to fire. That's what feeds, the American model. In Europe, it's not easy to hire, easy to fire. In many countries, it's nearly impossible to fire someone. So that's the reality. That's the environment we live in. And I think, if we're on the side of innovation, if we're on the side of entrepreneurs creating new products, creating added value, we have to, rethink this entire model and be much more open in criticizing the conventional wisdom, because Europe is, in my view, in danger of becoming, frankly, irrelevant 10 years from now, unless we change course.
Nico, decentralization, deregulation, and flexible labor relationships to improve the system. What is your view about this?
You're adding lots of things. Flexible labor relations is outside of this discussion and a dangerous topic. But I agree with much of what I heard from both the speakers. I think the pressure from the private sector will just change the stablecoin environment, because it does have to get away from the banks. And I think the pressure will be to change how it is. I don't know where it'll come from. I do agree with the overregulation, and I say almost as a joke, it's a very odd thing. We have an incentive. I like incentives, to think about incentives. We have an incentive as members of the parliament to have our name on a law. So we have an incentive to make laws. And in fact, you sort of get an award at the end of 5 years if you've done many laws. That is a bad incentive. And I don't know if we can find the other one. A person who does no laws, they'll say he was useless. No, but you see what I'm saying? So we have a star. So I know in Greece, at the end, they look at how many laws did he pass? Oh, he did work. So the incentive is to pass the laws, and that ends up with the overregulation. I agree completely. We have a confusion. I'm trying to think now of our good friend Lagarde, as you put it, trying to figure out the financial world right now with stablecoin, with DLT, with crypto, with stablecoins in Europe. And it's not going to be easy to monitor all that. And so here I come to the deregulated model of the United States, which has that incredible push of technology. Let's not forget that in 2007 and 2008, we had the financial crisis starting from the United States because of deregulation. We went through that process. And if we have another one with stablecoin, it'll probably start over there. I'm not saying we have to stop it, but the chances are that the stablecoin can debank the whole system. And here we have to think about the EU citizen who, when he goes to the tokenized deposit or versions of that, if there's only a few companies, and there we have to be more competitive, they'll have information. Let's say there's a few companies that are doing tokenized deposits running that world. They're going to have a lot of information, more than what happens now with Visa, MasterCard. So there's a worry about what power will come with the blockchain, which will know my life better. Blockchain will know what I do better than anything else if I enter that world, right? So there's the worries of have to be careful. And there comes the EU to say, let's see how we can be careful to protect the citizen so he doesn't enter this blockchain world and then he's followed his whole life and then he's used for advertising, etc. I'm just saying the other side, we have to think of both sides. That doesn't mean we overregulate. I agree, it's too much. And there has been commissioners in the past who have said, for every law we pass, let's take out 2. We haven't done that. I would like to see that. So I know it sounds strange from an S&D person, but I was not in politics until the last 3 years. So I've seen the private sector, and I know the small companies suffer. So yesterday I was at a medical with doctors and the big companies, and they said, we came up with a new technology. It took us 800 hours to set it up, but 4,000 hours to do compliance. So those are the things we hear as politicians, and we know there's a problem. I think your suggestions are very good. You went ahead at a time when it wasn't so clear. Now we have more information. Let's adjust. So what does that say? We need some flexibility in our laws. There has to be some flexibility in our laws. The same way we had this thing about in 2035, no more standard combustion engines. Electric, how about technology neutral? Now we're waking up that we just want lower carbon. Why should we say electric? I'm not saying that's the wrong solution. So let's let the market come to the decision. Let's give our goal, carbon down, and we don't have to choose the technology, so we shouldn't do that also in our digital world. I'm giving general principles.
I'm really proud to see the conversation and the narrative of the European Parliament in the last 10 years evolving so robustly towards a consensus of how to make Europe competitive and strong. And with this message coming from our politicians, I would like you to ask you to join me in a round of applause and move forward. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I know you're off. We'll be in touch.